This FedGov Today program is sponsored by IBM. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, a supply chain solution for the heart of warfighting systems, ramping up the drive for responsible AI at the Pentagon, and the talent drive is on for one leg of the nuclear triad. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. 8 hubs around the country will be the building blocks of a Microelectronics Commons. Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks calls the Commons an effort to bridge what some observers refer to as the valley of death between research and development and production. Dr. Deb Shenoy is Principal Director for Microelectronics and Director of the Defense Microelectronics Cross-Functional Team in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Deb, welcome. It's great to see you again. Thanks for coming on. What is the Microelectronics Commons, and what do you and your colleagues want to accomplish with it?
Yeah, so the Microelectronics Commons is really to ensure that we do onshore prototyping. A lot of the challenges around lab to fab prototyping that we've had in the past, we're going to address those through the Microelectronics Commons. It's a network of hubs and cores. There's 8 hubs, as you mentioned, and there's also a number of cores. These are the fabs or the foundries where the actual manufacturing is going to get done. The big challenge has been trying to cross that valley of death, as you mentioned, which is, a lot of the research is done in the universities, startups, small companies, but really translating that research into prototyping in a fab or a foundry has been challenging for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the scale of investment that's needed to do the translation is a lot higher than that early stage R&D process, as well as trying to protect the IP onshore and accelerating that lab to fab prototyping, because if we rely on offshore suppliers for the prototyping, it adds to the time scale for that prototyping. So we want to ensure there's co-location of the labs and the fabs so that there is expedited lab to fab prototyping. And so it's really for those objectives we want to ensure we have access to the Microelectronics Commons.
How much does the commercial element of this impact the way that you and your colleagues are going about this? It strikes me that there is a lot more of this work going on in the commercial sector than 15, 20, 30 years ago when a lot of these items were produced specifically for the Department of Defense. Is that a fair read on my part?
Yeah, so the commercial sector, as you know, has relied on offshore suppliers for their manufacturing. We certainly want to try to build the manufacturing onshore because we do about 12% of manufacturing in the US. We want to ramp it up, and so it's really to also strengthen the manufacturing capabilities in the US, even as we do the lab to fab prototyping, bridging that first valley of death. There's actually a second valley of death, which is the scale up of those technologies. And then the third is, productization, the commercialization of those technologies. So it's really to ensure that there's strong partnership on the commercial side, the defense industrial based companies that are critical for the success of the Microelectronics Commons. So those are all the stakeholders that we want to see participate in the Commons.
You mentioned there's a second valley of death, and I referred to the first one as I introduced you, Dev. What's the second one, and are the solutions to the second one similar to the first, which a lot of people say is just the department being there to commit to buying when the technologies scale and go into production?
Yeah, so initially the research that is done in the laboratories, universities, startups, small companies, we want to ensure that the prototyping in the foundries or the fab are capable of sustaining and supporting those kinds of capabilities. And then once you've proven the prototype in the foundry or the fab, you've got to demonstrate scale up, which is, instead of building a few devices, you may have to scale it up to millions of devices, just as an example. So it's that scale up that is challenging. It's demonstrating things like yield of the chips, demonstrating things like the quality of the chips. Those are very critical, elements of that process to ensure, there's sufficient yield, and that really is what is responsible for getting the cost down.
A lot was made during the pandemic of the supply chain challenges because, as you referred to, a lot of the chips are made offshore, and getting them into items that could come into the United States during the pandemic proved to be a real supply chain challenge. What did you and your colleagues learn about that and that you're applying to the way that you're working through microelectronics today?
Yeah, it certainly exposed the vulnerabilities in the supply chain, and so what we are ensuring is that we have a better understanding of that supply chain, which, as you know, is a global supply chain. It's a very complex supply chain across that cycle of design, manufacturing, assembly, packaging, and testing. So what we want to do is understand who are the suppliers for the DoD? What are the vulnerabilities in the supply chain? Can we ensure that there's multiple suppliers to make the supply chain more robust and resilient? And that's what we've done. We've actually got a software tool that we've been using to understand the supply chain. And so through that tool, we can predict things like if there's going to be some specific geopolitical tension we need to be concerned about, how do we address those? Because we have a strong reliance on leading edge from Taiwan. So that's one example. But it could be other scenarios as well. Maybe a natural disaster. What if there's a natural disaster and some of the suppliers are not able to supply what we need? So we have actually done fairly thorough, rigorous analysis to understand the supply chain, as well as to try and strengthen the supply chain by relying on multiple suppliers.
Let's take a step back. Define microelectronics. I mentioned at the beginning, as I opened the show, that these chips are at the heart of a lot of warfighting systems, but I imagine it, as you're talking about, in some cases maybe millions of them being necessary, it's not just that. I imagine this technology's permeated a lot of what the department does.
Yes, so the word micro, that refers to the scale, of course, right? When the transistors were first built, they were in the micron scale. So that's where the micro comes from, and the micro fabrication refers to the chip manufacturing in the foundries and the fabs that I talked about. So the challenge is really ensuring that DoD has access to that microfabrication, DoD has access to the chips. And when you think about microelectronics, it's so broad. It's everything from leading edge logic chips, memory, RF electronics, radio frequency electronics, analog, mixed signal, photonics. So it's really a fairly broad sort of gamut, as it were, of electronics that you have to deal with. And then on top of it, it's not just leading edge logic. It's also state of practice technologies. It's a legacy technology. A lot of our platforms, they last for decades. So we got to ensure that the electronics is capable of sustaining those platforms in the longer term. And so that's a huge challenge that we are trying to address.
Given that the department is trying to think about where it needs to be platform-wise 10, 15 years out, what's the microelectronics piece of that, and what do you need to think about today for where the state-of-the-art may go? I know it's impossible to predict, but where the state-of-the-art may go at some future time, 10, 15 years down the road.
Yeah, so when we think about autonomous systems in the future, swarm of drones and those kinds of platforms, we really need to have highly capable microelectronics. We need to have what's, for example, known as neuromorphic computing, brain-inspired computing, where the form factors can be a lot smaller, it's a lot more energy efficient. And we need those kinds of capabilities because on the platform that I just mentioned, you've got to have AI capability. And that AI capability is not just inference at the edge, it's also training at the edge. Today we do the training in the cloud-based data servers and so on, but we need to figure out ways to do training and inference at the edge. And that's possible, for instance, through new technologies such as neuromorphic computing, brain-inspired computing, where we think about integrating the memory and the logic. Literally for decades, we've used what's known as von Neumann computing, where the logic and memory are separated. But going forward, we're going to use things like neuromorphic computing. Heterogeneous integration is critical, because we can't rely much longer on monolithic integration of silicon chips. We want to think about heterogeneous integration, 2.5D, 3D integration of different kinds of chiplets. And so that's a huge challenge.
We have less than a minute left, Dr. Shenoy. How would you judge the Microelectronics Commons a success? What will be the markers that you use to see if you accomplish what you want to?
So we have a number of metrics that we have provided as examples. Cross-hub collaboration is a good example of that. Creating IP is very important. We want to see a robust and resilient workforce, because as you know, even as we think about onshoring the microelectronics ecosystem in the US, we need to have a robust workforce. And then we are, through our ongoing programs, supporting projects that will ensure that there is a robust workforce in microelectronics, particularly for the DoD, because the DoD has challenges around radiation microelectronics, high temperature microelectronics. So there's a number of custom needs that microelectronics has. So those are supported through as workforce. But going forward, we want to ensure that there is a commercial support as well. Commercial industry is going to be supported as well. And then so that's where we have collaborations with Department of Commerce and other agencies and departments to ensure that we are coordinating and collaborating on the CHIPS and Science Act funded effort.
Dr. Shenoy, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much. It was good to be here.
You can read more about the Microelectronics Commons and the department's supply chain work on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, ramping up the drive for responsible AI at the Pentagon. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Here's Jim Richburg, head of cyber policy at Fortinet and Fortinet Federal board member, from the program Zero Trust In Depth, presented by Fortinet Federal.
The good news is this is a partnership in the sense that government does a really good job creating frameworks, technical reference architecture, strategies, whether they're for the entirety of government with the OMB memo or DoD's strategy. They may have the hardest job. All the implementation tools, and Paul talked about this, are commercial solutions. They don't make their own stuff. They implement it. So we're providing this. So the good news is this really has helped to advance progress on something that is a concept we all agreed was a good idea.
To learn more, go to fedgovtoday.com/indepth. Welcome back. President Biden's executive order on artificial intelligence references responsible use of AI 26 times. More than half of those references are to certain actions agencies have to take by certain deadlines regarding responsible AI. Terry Halvorsen is Vice President for Federal Client Development at IBM. He's former Chief Information Officer at the Department of Defense. Terry, welcome. It's great to have you on the program again. Good to see you. What is the connection between what agencies have to do, particularly the Department of Defense, regarding fulfilling the terms of the executive order on AI and the mission that the department is on, especially regarding AI, to deliver capability to warfighters?
Yeah, Francis, first, good to see you again, and always a pleasure to be on the show. Always one of the better shows. We all watch it. This is a good question because in this time we've got a lot of alignment between the two. As we were talking before the show a little bit, today, if I want good AI answers, I better have good data going into the system. And no secret, data is a problem for a lot of commercial and federal agencies in getting it the right data, getting your data accurate, and maybe more importantly today, having your data auditable. You want to know where that data came from, what were the original sources, and this is very well emphasized in the executive order. Responsible means, though, beyond the data, that I'm using AI to do some of the right things. You know, I really like that Pentagon, in fact, has put out additional guidance to support the executive order, and I thought they did a really good job with it, talking about everything from where do you keep a man in the loop. You know, there's a lot of discussion today about, well, AI could take over, maybe it's making decisions, particularly in the Pentagon, where we're talking about lethality could be part of that decision. They've been very strong about, we're going to keep the man in the loop on those lethality discussions. We're going to use the full process. You know, one of the things that we were able to do at IBM right before Christmas, we hosted 21 DoD leaders. And what we talked about together was, what are the right processes to do this out? IBM has been a strong supporter of processes in AI, making sure that the value of the data, the quality of the data, the audibility of the data was all in place before you move to your AI answer. And I think that's something that particularly DoD has done very well to embrace.
There are 5 components in the CDAO look at responsible AI. Responsible is 1, equitable, traceable, reliable, governable, and it sounds like those all come back, as I read through what the department has written and what your colleagues are writing, it all comes back to the idea of super clean, auditable data.
It does, and making sure that beyond the super clean, beyond the auditable, you know the purpose of what you're going to do with the data. I think a lot of what happens, and you and I have been around long enough to see this, you know, whatever the buzz is, let me go buy a box of AI, let me go buy a box of it. I think within AI, they started not doing that. You know, there's been a lot of complaints that maybe DoD and the federal government has been slow to roll out AI. I don't think so. I think they're really thinking hard. I think they're trying to follow the right processes to do that and make sure that the data is structured and being used in the right way. And they've written a lot about that. It's in their acquisition guidelines. It's in the mission guidelines. I'm very happy to see what DoD has done on that.
Yeah, one of the things that's striking to me is among those 5, the one that I think I've talked to the most people about, both in industry and on the government side, is the governable piece. And to be able, so that each person can say, I know this is how we're using AI, and I know this is how we're using the results of what we get from it.
I would add to the word governable, and I think it's in a couple of things. Not only is it governable, but it's transparent. You've nailed it. They do understand what they're doing, what they're using it for, and to the extent within DoD they can be transparent and share everything, they're doing that across the board. The dialogues we've had with DoD, with industry, not just with IBM, but industry in general, has been very good. And here's the other thing I see that's to me is big. That's being applied in the allied way in our coalitions. I mean, Europe just published a big AI document. The Germans are way ahead in that too, in Audible. So I think as a group, the defense agencies globally have really said we're going to do that, and I think that's one of the things that separates us maybe from the side that didn't do those things.
Understood. About 30 seconds left, Terry. How does one organization inside DoD know that they're getting their piece of it right?
I think a couple things. I think the way they're doing it, they're testing it small. So we're taking a look, and we work with them to say, okay, here's the things we wanted to get done. Did it add to the mission? Did we do it within cost? And did the data we come up there check out to be the right data to use?
Terry, it's great to see you as
always a
my
pleasure.
Friend. Thank you very much. You can read more about operationalizing AI on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the talent drive is on for one leg of the nuclear triad. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Here's Jim Coyle of Lookout on innovation in government from West.
And so when we take a look at, some of those challenges, the opportunity there, right, is that we can sit and talk about how do we protect national security interests, right, and prevent our adversaries getting a hold of the data, right, that we really need to have kept internalized. And so through implementing a lot of the zero trust methodologies, we actually stand a really good chance of being able to stop what has become this rampant stealing of highly classified information.
For more, go to innovationingov.com. Welcome back. A new talent onboarding program is moving from pilot to scale at the Navy's Strategic Systems Programs. Kelly Lee, the SSP Plans and Programs Division Director, calls the Newcomer Onboarding Workshop Program a special recipe. Vice Admiral Johnny Wolf Jr., U.S. Navy, is Director for Strategic Systems Programs. Admiral, welcome. It's great to see you. What is special about the special recipe at SSP? Welcome.
Yeah, so thanks for asking that. As part of America's warfighting Navy, talent is really important. And as we, in Strategic Systems Programs in this mission, it's even more critical. And so what we've decided to do is figure out how we take each individual within our program and connect them to the mission. So we've started what we call Strategic Systems Programs New Onboard Orientation Program. And what that workshop does, SSP Now, it brings in a cohort of new folks to the organization, and that doesn't mean that they're new to the workforce. What it means is they're new to this organization and how this organization needs to provide the most credible strategic deterrent that this nation's ever known. And so we do that, we put them in a cohort, and we put them together for a year. And we not just train them in their job, but we talked about the history of the program. We talked about the criticality of what the Navy is doing to support the nuclear triad. And then we send them down to various installations and other organizations to really see what their individual talents are doing for the bigger mission for the United States Navy.
What is your sense of what is similar and what is different or maybe even unique about SSP compared to other parts of the Navy that you want those people to learn?
Yeah, certainly. So again, if you look at what we do providing the nation's nuclear deterrent, the Navy provides 70% of our day-to-day nation's deterrent, which is absolutely critical, not just for our American way of life, but for our allies and partners as well. So as we get them to understand that criticality, we're a very small program if you look at the scale of influence that we have both within the Navy and our nation. And so we get them to understand why the way we do business and how critical the way we do business is, not just for us, but for the American people to have absolute confidence that our submarine forces deterrent works every single day.
We are about a year and a half or 2 years into your last strategy document, which was titled Director's Intent 2022. And that document references former CNO Gilday's NAB Plan 21 and some other documents. You mentioned right at the beginning America's Warfighting Navy. That is the current CNO's document, guiding document. How does what you're doing and the mission you're fulfilling and the way that you're moving Director's Intent 22 to support that, what's the intersection there, sir?
Yeah, so Admiral Franchetti, as she's come on board, as she has talked about America's warfighting Navy, and particularly as we look at what that means. And if you look at the three things she said, warfighting, warfighters, and foundation. Well, if you look at what we've set out in this program, we call it Sea-Based Strategic Deterrent 2084, and that's simply to get us to really think long-term about strategic deterrence. But as you break that down into what we call the Director's Intent 2022, it absolutely ties into where Admiral Franchetti is going. The first one being, if you look at the three things we said, we have to sustain the deterrent that we have today on our Ohio-class SSBNs. We have to prepare for the future with the new systems that will go on Columbia-class and will go on our allies in the United Kingdom submarines. And we have to make sure that we protect that partnership with the United Kingdom. So that's how we're getting warfighting capability today and into the future. For our warfighters, if you look at what the Admiral has said, it really is, how do we train? How do we give our warfighters, both sailors and civilians, everything that they need, all the training, so that they really are our advantage?
I note that there are three enablers in Director's Intent 22, and they sync pretty well with what Admiral Franchetti has just put out in 2024.
They absolutely do. If you look at people, again, it's how are we getting our sailors and our civilian workforce ready today and into the future. It's our industry partners. How do we bring them along to everything that they need to help us do to accomplish the Navy's mission? And then you look at the infrastructure, both within the government and within industry, of how we're going to coalesce all this together to continue to be the premier warfighting Navy that this nation needs.
How do you mark something like Director's Intent this far in to determine whether we're on target where we want to be, or maybe in this one area we should refocus or redirect in some way?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've actually set up lines of effort where, based on each one of the things that we've got to accomplish, we've got a series of tasks that we've laid out for our leadership and our workforce to achieve, and we monitor those and we report on those. Actually, I get an update twice a week on how we're proceeding on all of those lines of effort, which gets us to Director's Intent and gets us where Admiral Franchetti would like the bigger Navy to go in this business.
What specifically do you need right now, need more of, whether it's in the talent realm or in the hardware or software realm? What do you need, or what do you need more of, sir?
So what we really need today is we need a very talented workforce that understands the mission, that's all in, which is why we've started things like SSP now to go out there and find that talent. We need more players on the field, both in uniform and in the civilian ranks. So this is part of the way we're doing that. And of course, again, as you look at America's warfighting Navy, that is where the Navy is really focusing, getting the right people to be able to continue to stay ahead. That's the first one. And then from an industry perspective, we are back into revitalizing our industry partners into all of these critical missions that not just I have to do within the deterrent, but the bigger Navy has to do to be successful.
I'll follow your sports analogy, sir. What positions do you need those players to play when you want to put them on the field?
So I need them in all positions.
Yeah.
I need guards, I need forwards, I need centers. We need everybody, and that's just because we're into the NCAA Final Four these days. But we need all of those positions because, quite frankly, no one position alone, as we know, can win. It's got to be a team sport, and so we're looking for those individuals that not only want to be individual contributors, but understand that contribution plays to a bigger integration of what we need to accomplish.
How will you look at some future point? Again, similar question to before, but what will you look at to determine, okay, as I'm formulating Director's Intent 25, 26, I don't know your timeline, to build onto this? How will you look at what you've accomplished to determine what the next steps are?
Yeah, so one of the metrics that we're using from a people perspective is how many are we bringing in and how long are they staying within the organization. So we've started to monitor that, and we're having some success with that because of programs like SSP Now. And we'll continue to look and adjust based on what we are asked to do, what Congress asked us to do, what the Department of Defense asked us to do, to continue to monitor where do we need that talent set and how do we go recruit that and then retain that within the Navy.
And all of the things that are happening across the world right now, how does that impact the way that you look at the mission that you are supposed to deliver?
So for this mission, certainly it's what we do in nuclear deterrence. It underpins all of the other national strategies and war plans that we've got. So holistically, we've stayed focused on making sure that the deterrent today remains credible. And as we watch where we're going into the future, certainly we've all talked about Russia's recapitalizing everything that they do. China is building up their triad. We remain focused on making sure the systems that we put in our warfighters' hands give them that advantage every single day.
You've referenced the tournament. You're obviously focused, and you have a lot of choices in Texas. What's your choice as we get closer to the end of the tournament, sir?
Well, based on where we're at now with the Sweet 16, University of Houston.
All right. Thank you very much for being on with me, sir. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You can read more about the Navy's strategic systems programs on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in just a moment. Explore the power of artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and digital innovations in healthcare. Watch Innovation in Government from HIMSS, April 2nd at 8:30 p.m. on WJLA 24/7 News. Learn from leaders at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Defense Health Agency, and more. Don't miss this exclusive insight into the future of government and healthcare innovation. Tuesday evening, April 2nd at 8:30, only on WJLA 24/7 News, sponsored by Carasoft. Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, thousands of Sea Service members are coming to Sea Air Space, the annual conference the Navy League presents. It features dozens of speakers from the Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and other sea services, and more than 400 exhibitors on the show floor. It runs April 8th through 10th at the Gaylord at National Harbor. I'm hosting the Chiefs panel to open Sea Air Space Monday morning with the Chief of Naval Operations, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and the Administrator of the Maritime Administration. You can read more about Sea Air Space and register at fedgovtoday.com/events. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching and have a great week. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today.